So while they're doing that, let me introduce the panelists. So we have four very distinguished panelists. You obviously know David Hughes. He's a well-known personality at this event, but particularly I think PCCW is looking actively at doing some NFV implementations that can be monetized by 2016. So there's a lot of things on Dave's mind. Eric from Six Wind, who are looking at technology integration among other things and also speeding up the data plane. Danielle from Artisan, who are of course looking at embedded systems, and they've been talking to a lot of customers, so we'll hear something about that. And finally, Benny, who is with Qualitest, who are really the second largest software test vendor by many counts. And so there's some interesting things we'll hear from Benny on what it takes to actually test this stuff, because you can't really deploy it without testing it. So the panel is called Status of Transformation of NFV going to 2016, and I thought it'll be a good point for us to actually take stock of where we really are. So it turns out that if you look at a lot of the surveys that have been done in the last 1 year, at the beginning of this year, there was a survey done by Jim Metzler which showed that people were actually not as aware, this room being an exception of course, of NFV as they were of SDN. And I think all that has happened is that while the awareness has grown, I think the confusion has also grown with that. So that's one thing we want to talk about. So I thought I'll take a couple minutes to kick off this and level set for the audience what we are doing by doing a State of the Union NFV and start with, well, what is it? And of course, we have hundreds of definitions, but the one I really liked is by George McCabe of Mitel, who said that it's basically about leveraging virtualization that has already been done in the IT world for changing the cost equation for carriers and telcos. And I also like what Andre of KPN said yesterday, which is that it's really a transformational tool for the operator to become more agile and OTT-like. And we'll hear a little bit more about how you get there. And then the next thing you really want to talk about is, well, what are the drivers and what is the market? And the drivers, among of many surveys that were done, there were three top drivers. And surprisingly, the first one was the reducing time to deploy new services. And the second one was greater management flexibility of the network. And OPEX and CAPEX reduction came in at number 3. So that's, most of us think about OPEX and CAPEX, but really the main motivation from many operator perspectives is the ability to add new services. And market, well, we already heard about the market from, Michael of IHS and Infonetics, which is it's going to be about $30 billion SD and NFV combined by 2020, 24 billion of it in displaced spending, 6 billion of new spending, mostly software. And if you split it up into NFV, then I was looking at a report by Research and Markets, which said that by 2020, it's going to be about $8.7 billion. And with a cumulative aggregate growth rate of something like 83% for the next 5 years. So that's quite something. And then the next thing we really want to work about is a lot of standards bodies, a lot of people talking about NFV, but there are really 5 organizations that are key, and there are many peripheral ones. The ETSI, of course, we all know that. They started the whole engine going, 25 POCs in progress over the last couple of years, 9 specific use cases defined. Then the IETF, service function chaining working group looking at things like discovery, resource management, chain creation, and how do you actually steer traffic flow in a network. And then the TMF came in with its Zoom idea, which is zero-touch orchestration, operations and management, and a number of POCs and smaller catalyst projects under that to kind of demonstrate the capabilities. And then we have OPNFV, which is really trying to fill in the gaps in the development of all the open source projects and bring it all together, because that's one of the needs of the hour. And finally, the MEF, which you'll hear about from my friend Rami later this afternoon, who have this lifestyle service orchestration concept, which is really the idea that you've got to think of a service from beginning, starting to think about it, the customer thinks about it, the operator does something, configures the network, the service is done, and then you end the service. So you have to look at the whole life cycle and how do you really automate that using NFV and of course other concepts as well. And then what are the themes that we've been hearing in 2015? Because that's what this panel is going to be building on. Let's talk a little bit about those. And I'll do that in the next slide. So there are few themes that have come recurrently throughout this year that I wanted to summarize here. One is this idea of openness. Okay, we need non-closed ecosystems. We want to have the ability to decouple best-of-breed software, decouple all of our components, and you just heard about that in the Quad presentation, and assemble best-of-breed software. So you can get an orchestrator from somebody, a VNF manager from somebody else, and the hardware from an entirely different vendor, and you should be able to put it together. And both Verizon, Chris of Verizon, Wendy of KPN, and many others have been espousing that in this conference. The other is standards, all right? It turns out that actually less is more. There are just way too many standards, too much confusion. So what we really need there is convergence, so that we could actually make sense of what's going on. And KP and Wendy said that yesterday in her talk, that there's just too many things happening. And other people in various talks have also said that, and in side conversations. Then information and policy models. So Michael started the whole process by saying, look, we need device and service models so that we can actually orchestrate something. We need to specify those, and they have to be in a standardized format. Otherwise, you can't really build a network that is not closed. And then most importantly, this is the white elephant in the room. We know all about the technology. We almost know nothing about the business model. So that's an open issue I've heard throughout this year in every single conference when people are asked, well, what's the business case? Can you demonstrate that? There are very few studies, if any, that show that. There is some work by Colt, which talk about their VCPE implementation and how that helps to reduce costs and so forth. But that's about the only operator and only good study that is available there. The other theme has been skills and organizational transformation, right? You need to change the skill base. IT and network ops needs to learn about networking, IT needs to learn web scale applications. You need to put the two of them together. And how is the organization going to be involved? I mean, are they going to be one? Are they going to be a different organization? That's a soul-searching exercise every operator is doing right now. And then finally, there's need for education and evangelization, it turns out. As I said, awareness isn't as much as we might imagine it is. And so both within the operator operations groups and within the enterprise customer, you really need to have some kind of an education of what is the NFV solution really going to do for us, and what are the benefits, and why should we be using it. And finally, you need to transform service provisioning and orchestration. I mean, this is absolutely critical if you're going to get anywhere with the NFV and SDN bandwagon. So what are the challenges? And this is going to set the stage for the question that we're going to pose to our panelists. One is that despite a lot of POCs, the operators have said in multiple surveys, and I will, there were several I was studying, where they said, well, it's a significant effort to get from the POC to production environments. And that's a huge barrier. It's not so clear that a POC will just transform directly into production. The other is you have to worry about performance scaling and integration of the virtual and non-virtual parts of your network for commercial deployments. How are you really going to do that? All right? And then service provisioning itself needs to be transformed in three different ways. You now have physical resources and you have virtual resources. You have resources in the core of your network and you have them in the cloud. And finally, you might have different types of elements that you're dealing with some of which are disaggregated, some of which are still in the old mode, and you've got to work through all of that. And management, orchestration, network planning, all of these have to incorporate NFV and the concept that you now have disaggregation. Finally, the maturity of the solutions that are available. I mean, Andre spoke about that, Chris Evans spoke about that, AT&T speakers, multiple spoke about that the vendor solutions are perhaps not as mature as one might be led to believe. So you need, I love the quote from Chris who said, look, my biggest job is balancing the aspirational with what is really realizable. And Wendy echoed that by saying that when they actually looked at all the vendor solutions, they weren't really as advanced as they were led to believe by the frenzy in the industry. So that's really an inhibitor as well. And you need to think about resources, virtualization, sharing, how you do contracts, how do you provision and requisition stuff from your vendors, how do you sell it to your enterprise customers. All of that needs to be rethought in this new environment. And finally, security at all levels, from infrastructure to services to even the very functions that you're looking at, the so-called virtualized functions. You need to worry about security. Because without that, nothing really, you cannot offer a reliable service to your enterprise customer. So that kind of sets the stage for where we are with the state of NFV. And now what I'd like to do is I'll kick off with the panels and I'll pose a few questions to each of the panelists so that will both give you an idea of where they're coming from and also give us an opportunity to hear their specific perspectives in their areas of expertise. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple questions to each of them one by one. So let's start with Benny, you. I know that you have been looking at a lot of the I'm sorry, not Benny, Daniel. Yeah. So you've been looking at a lot of the customer requirements in the last year and maybe before that. And could you share with us what you're seeing in the customers today and where you expect things to go as we move into, let's say, 2016. You know, what is your perspective on that?
Are we awake? Working? So my name's Daniel Lee. I'm from Artisan Embedded Systems. We are a longtime provider of really core telecom systems, and we've watched this change across the networks. And much of 2014 and 2015 have been spent learning how to first kind of disaggregate the hardware from the software as a customer request, and produce platforms that are first standardized, standards-based, and then second, then customers can begin to virtualize on. Most of the virtualization efforts this year that we've seen to date have really been this proof of concept idea, where we take some pieces, we take some OpenStack, we put it on, we show the customer how it can work, and there's some lab trials that happen. And this is kind of the state of the industry we see today. Even though the hardware is moving more and more towards server-style hardware, there is this hesitancy to really complete virtualization. No one's quite sure what it means. The other issue, and you heard it brought up in a couple of talks today, especially the BT guy, who talked about the fact that not all workloads are equal. And therefore, even though you have lots of compute power, you still need specialized functions, and you still need acceleration capability and the ability to offload certain work types. So now how do you virtualize those, and how do you create an environment in which the customer has a resource pool that's virtualized, and yet the resources are still specialized? So that's kind of the history up to today, where we've been. What we see in 2016 is customers want to do field trials. They've said, okay, we saw the proof of concept, give us something we can put in the field. We have a field trial going in South America where an operator decided to do a small trial first, small being at a small country level. And so they're going to do a video offload service, really designed to provide service to end customers. Again, BT made a very clear point that all of this is really neat technology, but the goal is all of us to provide service to customers, things we can actually monetize, that fulfill a need in the marketplace and that can turn into revenue for each of us. So they're going to start at that level. That's one service. We had a second customer who asked us for a proof of concept with some very specific features like MOS and Juju. We had discussed this earlier. And they have a very specific use case, and they wanted to see that the hardware platform they were selecting, which has some performance benefits, but was not standard, would actually meet their needs. So we think 2016 is a deployment year. We think there's a lot of opportunity, but that the specialized acceleration components are going to live side by side with the standard server-based components for
I'm glad you said that, because that often gets lost in the noise, which is that even if you go to server-based components, some of those server-based components may work in conjunction with specialized components or may incorporate it themselves. And I think, Eric, you can probably talk to that fact as well, where you are trying to accelerate some of these components, at the sort of software level, right?
Yeah. So I'm Eric Carmes, I'm founder and CEO of SixWin. So in the panel we have the technology provider. So we see probably the problem from the bottom and not from the top.
The view is the same.
Yeah. So to come back to what you were saying just before, so clearly I don't think there will be a very fast transformation to NFV, and we will see everything happen within a few days. So I don't think about that. And also, what we also forget maybe a little bit in the landscape is, so we have the standards and everything, but we have the players. And so, there are some companies in the world that have been developing network equipment in the past. I think so. And there are also, what is the important piece in this is the policy, the strategy of each provider, especially the big ones. So we work with these guys, and I think that there are some good news, in fact, to transition on the long term to NFV, because I think some equipment providers, and I think all the big guys, are thinking about virtualizing their equipment, probably not to be part of a totally open NFV environment, but more to have better equipment at a lower price to increase their margins and so on. So that's a starting point. And I think now we can say that a large number of networking applications can now move from dedicated architecture, hardware and software architecture, to, I would say, server-based. I'm not saying virtualized, first server-based, because the performance of the platform are becoming more and more effective. And also there are some companies like Sixwin able to provide high-performance networking software that help to do that. And then you can go really in that direction. So I don't know if you attended yesterday, I think, the presentation from Mavenir, so which is a sort of new player in the core, mobile core and so on. So they started, of course, they do not have history because it's a new company. They started to develop some software equipment. Now they are thinking about virtualization, and I think for me, it's a good news for NFV because there are some good reasons to move and for big players to move in that direction and to wait when everything will be ready for NFV orchestration, putting different VNFs on the same platform, all these things, having all the service provider ready to do that and so on, which is another problem, and you listed a couple of challenges, I think, unfortunately, that won't be solved in 2016.
So there will be a lot of need for integration of these diverse components.
So that's a step-by-step transition, and according to the strategy of each player will go into that direction or that direction.
So Benny, then let's bring it back to you. I mean, with this environment that both Daniel and Eric painted, what are you seeing in terms of the testability of these kinds of scenarios? You have diverse components and you have to test them to different standards. So clearly you all are seeing some of that. Can you give us a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that our working assumption, or what we really see, is that NFV is not only a technological shift, it's a cultural shift within organizations, and it's really being demonstrated a lot from the testing side. If I would look at DevOps, for example, one of the biggest changes in DevOps on top of the integration is the continuous testing. Testing starts to be a big issue because of the constraints which are coming from the customers, from the business side. Quality and assurance are really a big issue, and it really influences everyone. We think that it's also a cultural issue in the sense that suddenly the skills of the testers are a little bit different. We're talking about automation. NFV testing, on the one hand, it's network testing in the sense that you need to keep on with the SLAs and with the KPIs on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's software testing. It's a cloud, it's virtualization, it's software testing, the pattern is software testing. So this is really something which changes a lot the scene. What we have seen so far in 2015, we've seen, from our perspective, from the testing side, we were not involved in what I like to call the standalone POCs. There are many POCs over there. They have their targets are mainly marketing-wise, not marketing, but we haven't seen yet what I like to call in the telco language the field trials. We haven't seen the compound POCs. Because from testing point of view, if I'm looking at the NFV, the big challenge is in the orchestration. There's going to be a lot of stuff over there in the orchestration, and automation is a must because the testing culture of telcos is going to change dramatically. We are talking about endless regression testing, retesting, we are talking about acceptance testing, we are talking a lot of programs which are going to be launched from the business side. We're talking about a business impact which quality people are going to be involved in. In a lot of sense, it reminds me the revolution of the mobile application which was being demonstrated in testing. Testing starts to be not only, we all know that there's this famous saying that the earlier you test, you save money, but once it comes to mobile testing, if the quality is not going to be good enough, then the application is not going to be promoted. So that means that it's not an issue of saving money, it's an issue of losing money. So suddenly QA or testing becomes in the side of making money.
So one of the questions here would be like, what are some of the maybe one or two things that are going to change in the way people are going to test? You know, you already pointed out to the fact that there's going to be, you know, from standalone POCs, we'll go into more diverse field trials, which will require a whole new class of testing. So what are some of the challenges maybe that you see for, you know, coming up next year?
That the challenges, I think that we see a few challenges. The first one is the DevOps. DevOps is something new for some carriers, and it's a bit challenging. I don't think that the technology is the issue. I think that the practices and the process, this is the issue. Technology can always be challenged.
Okay, so that's actually I was going to ask that, whether there is a technology barrier there.
Exactly. The second thing is the orchestration level. Okay, the automation. We're doing it, the automation with Quality Systems, which is a very strong partner of ours. Automation is a big issue. Automation needs to fit to all of the DevOps patterns.
So do you mean even the testing of the automation itself is an issue that needs to be taken into account? Or?
I think it is. I think in some sense it is.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's bring it home to Dave now. And Dave, you could maybe comment on a few of the things that the vendors have talked about and see if that resonates with you. And then later on, I'd love for you to maybe talk to us about, you know, what are some of the, from the operator perspective, you know, what are the features that we can actually do with NFV going forward that can, in your words, delight the customer? You know, some thoughts on that.
Well, we'll step it back. First of all, to SDN in general. You know, when we look at SDN, we don't really see it as anything revolutionary at all. The main benefit we see from SDN is that it makes networks look like software, right? It makes networks normal. So all the things you do with software, now you can start doing with your network. Unit testing, regression testing. You know, I made a comment on the panel the other day, there's no such thing as a trivial change in a network today. There's not, you know. Any little change can have huge ramifications, so you make those carefully, you have maintenance windows, and it takes forever to even roll out security patches sometimes. So, but because SDN is going to start making networks more normal, look more like software, now we can be constantly doing, you know, continuous integration and deployment onto the network itself, not just the software controlling the network or the applications the users use, but the network itself becomes just a piece of software. It's a large distributed software development effort now. And you see that in sort of the user interfaces of operating systems on networks now. It's more like scripting. It's not, you know, stale command line stuff. It's really kind of more like writing code. And you're going to see more and more of that. And as we do things like decouple control plane from data plane, you'll start seeing even more of it. So testing becomes a huge thing, and that's something I've been working to bring into my network engineering organization, is not test automation. And my engineers looked at me like I had a third eye growing out of my head when I hired the first one. They're like, what's this for? I'm like, well, you know, just stand by, you'll find out.
Good news.
Yeah, exactly. So give me a card later, we can talk. But so now when you start looking at NFV and the functions, you know, honestly, customers really don't care. You know, they're still going to have a router. They don't care whether it's software or hardware, as long as it connects packets. Why? Because they're not really a technology company. They're not a network company. They really don't want to be bothered with it. They just want it to work, and they want it to work consistently. And they don't want to have to wait 3 to 6 months to a year whenever the hardware catches up with whatever feature or functionality they're looking for. They want it as soon as they come up with the idea. They want to see it in software. And this is, again, what SDN and NFV brings to it, is we now start to innovate at software speeds and not hardware speeds. So, you know, that's sort of the surprise and the delight to the customer, or it gets to the nature of it, is now they don't have to wait for things. In fact, it opens it up so they can actually innovate it themselves. If we can deliver some sort of application framework that sits on top of the network, so they can build their own custom applications for their own network, or outsource to somebody else to do it, or go to GitHub and find somebody else that's built some network application and deploy it, then let them do that, right? And I can do that for them as a carrier, but our mission as a carrier is to help the customer keep the main thing the main thing. If you're a law firm, you should be a law firm. If you're a bank, be a bank. If you're a manufacturing company, be a manufacturing. Be the Rembrandt of manufacturing companies. Don't let the technology hold you down. Now, they need the technology to succeed in their business. But because of the rate of acceleration and the growth of technology and the proliferation of technology, they're having to add more and more staff to their companies to master technology, and they're becoming technology companies. They're not keeping the main thing anymore. Their IT budgets are growing. They have to worry about truck rolls and dispatching staff, and they don't want to do these things, right? They want
I guess
somebody else to do that for them.
2016 will be more about, from the carrier's perspective, understanding the use cases from the customers, maybe anticipating some of them by vertical or whatever, and as you said, Dave, providing the technology behind that to keep them doing what they're doing.
You kind of think of it more of like even agile development. I don't know that we know the complete use cases and the stories. And the customers may not know them either. So you give them a little bit, and they use it, and they're like, "What about this?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, we can do that." And then a couple weeks later, you have it for them.
But then that's where I guess the SDN and NFV bit comes back, because we can do that. Doesn't take a year.
You can start doing this iterative interaction with customers individually. You don't have to treat them all like they're the same. You can talk with this one customer and do something for him and another, and it becomes much easier to manage the
that's
complexity.
Where the so-called agility actually plays a big role in that case, that you can get with an NFV-based architecture.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So let's open it up to the audience for some questions. If there are questions from the audience, we'll take that. Otherwise, we'll continue our own discussion, but I'm sure there may be some thoughts here. So does anybody have questions for the panel that we can address? Okay, if not, as you think about them, let me still continue with a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and that was, as we're architecting these NFV solutions, and we've talked about the fact that there's a disparate set of components that exist. So, Eric, what are the components that you're seeing the carriers use most often nowadays? I know we were talking offline, and you gave some thoughts. What's going on in that space?
At a high level, so if we take as a starting point the ETSI architecture, so we have the NFVI, we have the VNFs, and we have the management. So regarding the NFV infrastructure, so I think there is a lot of progress that has been done on this. So I agree with you that saying that some workloads, some VNFs need some specific offloads, maybe software or hardware offloads to work. And so I think there is a great job done right now at the ETSI, in fact, to standardize everything, because the problem is that there is a contradiction between virtualization and having some specific offloads. Yeah. There's something wrong in it. So for instance, if I take an example, if you want to do some crypto, so you need to export a kind of software API to serve the different VNFs. Otherwise, you break virtualization, like you break virtualization when you use SRIOV or this kind of thing. So I think a lot of progress has been done on this. There are still a couple of things to be done, but with what we have today, we certainly can start to think about virtualizing some workloads. So VNFs, so there are a lot of VNFs on the market already.
And the challenge is how do you kind of integrate
so, yes, so it's tens, thousands, or hundreds, I don't know. This said, so there is clearly I think a problem of performance that is going to happen. Again, the requirements in terms of performance are very different if you are talking about core networks or this kind of thing. So one day or another, I'm quite sure that all the vendors, and they are in the progress to do it, they will have to redesign, taking benefits from the new architectures and so on. So it's in progress, I would say. And some players have probably are being a little bit ahead because they started really first on software solutions. So management. So this is a big piece, of course. So it's so I'm very surprised about the number of people that can work around OpenStack. No, it's really amazing.
But it has a history now. I mean, it's been in development for a few years. I mean, in the enterprise environment
so we see, in fact, clearly here the power of a group of expert people working. So it's absolutely incredible. This said, so I'm not an expert in management, but I still think there are still a lot to be done regarding this. Okay. And that's why, again, to come back to the idea I had before, and I fully agree that being software-based opened a lot of opportunities, I would say, before being totally NFV managed, I would say. So you can perfectly have some virtualized equipment that are managed in a non-totally open architecture with existing management system, and so that's a way to go to NFV. But clearly, OpenStack is a major question. So until now, there's still some problem of scalability.
So Benny, coming to what Eric was saying, you know.
But what I just wanted to say is that OpenStack also there are a lot of progress because they can configure a VLAN, a few things, but networks are more complex than that. So there are still a lot of things to be added and to manage all the heterogeneous environment. So that's certainly a big piece.
Yeah, so taking it to production networks is another level of complexity you have.
And we see two approaches: people who are waiting a little bit, or people who say, okay, we are going to develop the missing pieces by ourselves or through partners and so on to make it work better.
So Benny, in this context, what Eric was saying, with these pieces and OpenStack and so on, how does the testing part change? What are you seeing in terms of the ability to put these pieces together? Because when you test it, they have to be somehow a coherent whole. So,
yeah, I think that the testing strategy for NFV it's based on several elements. Planning, which is always a part of every testing project, but then we're talking about compliance to standards.
So that's going to be a big deal going forward.
This is what, yeah, it's going to compliance to standard. We're talking about certification. We're talking.
So when you say standards, is it like MEF standards or
MEF, ETSI?
ETSI standards.
We talk a lot of ETSI, and I think that we are starting to see and feel. It's not we're starting to see, and we're getting requirements regarding capabilities for OPNFV as well.
Okay, yeah, because they're trying to integrate all the open
but
pieces.
we're seeing a lot, and I think with the fact that big players are promoting them, it becomes an advantage in this aspect. We're talking about staging the testing environment, which is also a classical testing issue. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, the automation. I think that once we're coming to the automation, I think that the big difference comparing to other areas of testing is that it's not that functional testing is not important, but the performance, the portion of performance is more significant comparing to traditional software testing. Something which you haven't seen yet, of course, is the migration, to see that there was a smooth transition after things have been done, what we call in our language the acceptance testing. We haven't reached this phase yet. I assume that we will start to see it in the end of 2016, where we're going to see a little bit of deployments taking place.
So Dave, I see that you had some thoughts.
Because sometimes I think we sort of overthink this whole thing. And on the other end, we're trying to boil the ocean, right? Because at the end of the day, this stuff is just software. So, I don't want to minimize the significance of standards, but if we sit around and wait for standards to come out, we'll be here 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, still talking about when's NFV going to get launched because they're waiting on the standard. So the testing is just normal testing. You know what you're supposed to get when you do it. We actually have something in production now that's based on OpenStack. It's not really NFV, it's just simply provisioning virtual machines, but that's the first step because guess what an NFV is? It's a virtual machine or a container. Right? We're putting a lot more emphasis on containers as opposed to virtual machines. But, at the end of the day, you just kind of got to do it, and if you sit around and wait for the standard, you're going to be waiting a long time before you really get anything meaningful done.
But then do you expect that, does the panel expect that there'll be, and I think we've talked about that, multiple parallel ecosystem that will just each be focusing on, I don't know, a specific application, maybe for mobile, maybe for data.
It's like any other industry, right? Pick any industry in the history of man, and eventually, that's what it was. You had a bunch of little ecosystems, and then you had, bigger fish buying smaller fish, and you have shakeout, and then eventually you get, AT&T, or, Delta Airlines, or, a train company, whatever.
Or Dell and EMC and VMware.
Exactly.
So so great. We'll start wrapping up. So any questions from the audience at this point? There's one, we can just take that.
I think one of the things missing from the testing that's different from traditional testing is because the hardware is no longer as reliable as it had been in the past, chaos monkey type testing is vital as well as just functional performance testing to check that it survives the outages required to make the system 5 nines reliable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, chaos monkey is a very critical thing, and a lot of telcos would be terrified of chaos monkey. Can you imagine going through your internet backbone and just shutting down backbone links just to see the knock jump around in excitement? Yeah, it sounds like great fun to me.
Go ahead.
I need to protest about the fact, No, actually what I would like to protest is that it's only software testing. What you said before, that it's software testing, because I think that the difference between it involves software, and of course it involves a lot of software testing strategies and techniques, etc. But it's different when you have to test, when you have to ensure quality for a telco, or also for a bank, but for a telco.
Why would it be different?
Comparing, because the level of coverage and the limits which we need to exceed, and the SLAs are higher than other industries. I agree with you that at the end of the day, it's industry and it's going to be aligned in a few years' time. But currently, this is a question which we always ask ourselves. Is NFV testing, or is it NFV testing?
It's just testing.
No.
Well, here's why I say that, right? Because, if you have one and it fails and that's going to actually impact the SLA, then you had too few to begin with. One of the expressions we use in my company a lot, or at least I use and try to get other people to have it, is 2 is 1, 1 is none, right? So if you have one and that goes down and that's going to cause an outage, you should have had more. You should have had 50 of those things scattered around however many sites you needed to. Now, the one place where that's true is the actual access layer to the customer itself, if they're coming in on a local loop, right? They've only got one of those. Now, you can try to sell them a second one, and we encourage customers heavily to do that, and they usually do. And so we actually like to try to test in an eye point sometimes. Fortunately, Mother Nature usually takes care of that for us, and because then the eye points go down, and you get to see things recover and work. And so at the end of the day, and that's where I think telcos are kind of making a mistake, is trying to think we're special, we're different. And that's why the OTTs are going to come along and eat our lunch, because they realize they're not special, they're not different, they're going to use us up until the point in time when they can do it themselves. And somebody's going to, and this comes back to the point I always make about, do you look at this, NFV, as a sustaining innovation or as a disruptive innovation? If you look at it as a sustaining innovation, then you're looking at it as a way to build services towards your target customers that you've always used, your high margin customers. How are you going to sell more things to banks? How are you going to sell more things to other networks? That's great, but the OTTs are going to look at this as, more of a disruptive innovation. And they're going to think, how can I sell this as a good enough service to a guy sitting at home? And I'll sell it to enough of those guys until I get the quality better so that I can start selling it to small offices, and I'll get it better then until I can start selling it to banks or to other networks. And then what do they need me for? They'll say, thank you for getting me here, but I can take it from now. Right?
Daniel, you had a closing thought?
I'd have to say we see this transformation as well on testing, where 5 years ago everything we did was NEBS hardened, high reliability. It came with a book of availability studies. Virtually nothing we're doing today is that way, but the customers are saying, we want NEBs capable, but we don't actually want to test them, we don't want to pay for it, we just know you can do it, but you have to do earthquake. So there are some things they're not giving up, and the 2 is 1, 1 is none is interesting because we see that being used in the RAN space more than any other space, even more than the core now. The edge of the network radio access guys are saying absolutely cannot go down. That's a revenue hit if that goes down. And so there are places where the old models are still playing and where testing is very stringent. But within the network, once they get past the edge, past the security gateway, they're saying, look, if we virtualize the whole thing, we've got lots of room and we won't go down.
Okay,
we'll
great. So 10 seconds each, one final thought for what's going to be the big thing for NFV in 2016. Each of the panelists. One thought only.
You know, I really don't have a clue what's coming next. I know what I'm doing, you know, and we're going to start generating revenues. That'll be the big thing, I think.
That's the
revenue.
biggest, yeah, absolutely. Eric, we just go around, you know, one thought for NFV 2016.
Unfortunately, I don't think a complete NFV solution will happen in 2016.
No,
so
of course,
that's
yeah.
pretty clear. But I think different pieces will be available, and I think that it will be possible to start to propose a kind of NFV ready solution to start to have new services at a better
least the first phase of
and at a better cost. Because you know, in the evolution of the technology and all these things, so what is the driver is the cost. So I often listen to the benefit of NFV. So the ultimate benefit is to sell new services, blah blah blah, and so on. The problem is it's difficult to have the business case. And I think if you can start by saving some OPEX and CAPEX, so it's a good way to go into this direction. And I think with all the technology we put together, so it starts to be interesting to do that and to prepare the future.
Daniel?
I would say that in 2016, the thing we're going to see is that products and services that drive revenue are going to get implemented, invested in. The rest will continue to be lab experiments. So if I take the customer a product and he can implement an OTC service so that he doesn't have to pay somebody else to do it, he'll seriously consider me. Otherwise, I think people are going to hold back and they're going to wait for nirvana. They're really looking for things that generate revenue, and that's what's going to work this year.
Got it. Benny?
I think that in 2016, we will start to see the Tier 1 carriers, the more big ones, starting to cross the chasm. They haven't done it yet. They were in the planning phase.
They're talking about it for several years now, yeah.
But they will start. They're not going to cross the chasm yet, but they'll start the journey of crossing the chasm. 2015 and 2014 were the years of strategists, planning, and evaluating, learning. In 2016, I hope and I believe that towards the end of 2016, NFV is going to be a part of the budgets in these sorts of organizations.
Okay, well, wonderful. I think that's all we have time for. Let's thank the panelists and all of you for being here. And we're going to come back.